Hello, grade 10s. We're now entering week 3 of distance learning. I just wanted to point out a few details to you before we get started on today's lesson. First thing I wanted to remind you is there was a note from guidance that you are to be registered in your grades Google Classroom. If guidance or the office needs to send you any information, how they're going to be doing it is through your grade code. Okay, so the code right here is posted. There was an announcement on April 13th. Okay, to remind you to get enrolled in that classroom so you can see all those important updates. So if you haven't already, please make sure you are uploaded on there. Also, please remember, when you're working through your activities, please make sure you're reading all of the instructions really importantly and really carefully and submitting them exactly as you said. Some of you are having problems because I was posting a 0 for you because it looked like you hadn't done work because you hadn't submitted it the way the instructions had asked you to submit it, so it looked like no work was done. So can you please make sure that you do submit? Also remember, work is due on Fridays. This is from last week, but remember, work is due on Fridays at 2:25, so the end of the normal school day. Okay, so please make sure that your submissions are always in by Fridays at 2:25. Okay, our first week was a little bit different because we had the holiday long weekend, but always check, and those are always posted on your classwork as well. You'll be able to see the time and the day that things are due. So if you could double check that before you before the end of every week to make sure that you're not losing any marks or I'm able to find all your work. Okay. Today what we're going to be taking a look at is organs part 1. Okay, you can find this on Google Classroom as well as linked in your calendar for week 3. Okay, where we are in your textbook, we're in 2.1 and 2.2, so page 56 to 58 and 64 to 71. Okay. So today we're going to talk a little bit about a few of our organ systems in our bodies and the major organs that make up those organ systems. So we're going to be talking about the lungs and the respiratory system, the heart and the circulatory system, the brain and your nervous system, and skin and your integumentary system. You're going to be summarizing one of the important organ systems that we're going to learn about this unit, which is the heart and the circulatory system, by completing a short gizmo at the end of this video lecture. Okay, so by the end of the class, what we should be able to do is be able to understand and describe the relationship between the cell, the tissue, and the organ, as well as be able to describe the structure and function, so what it looks like and what it does, for the lungs, heart, brain, and skin. Okay. So there's this really important relationship that you're going to see building throughout this unit. The first thing is, we know from last week that we have cells, and some of those cells are specialized cells, okay? So they're very good at performing one specific job. So one example of a type of specialized cell we learned about were nerve cells. These are called neurons. These are really, really good at sending electrical signals and sending essentially messages throughout your body, okay? When a group of cells comes together, and we also learned this last week, we call it a tissue. So one single nerve cell or neuron we may call a single cell, but when there's a number of those cells all working together in one common place, we would call that nervous tissue. Okay. When tissues come together, and what we're going to be focusing on this week, is when groups of tissues come together, they can actually form something called an organ. So these organs may be made of more than one tissue, and remember, tissues are made of more than one cell. So it's a really additive relationship, okay? Cells make tissues, tissues make organs. So groups of cells are called tissues, groups of tissues working together to perform a function would be called an organ. So the relationship here is we see one nerve cell, a group of nerve cells together would be called nervous tissue. And when nervous tissue comes together with other tissues, we can form an organ like our brain. Okay, so the first organ we're going to talk about today is your lungs. Your lungs are involved in respiration. So essentially the job of your lungs is to allow you to breathe in oxygen, which is what we need to perform cellular respiration or to stay alive, and get rid of carbon dioxide, okay, which is a waste product that is harmful to us, so it's something we need to get rid of, okay? Because lungs are an organ, we know it's made of more than one tissue. So specifically, the lungs are made of connective tissue and epithelial tissue. So we talked about those two tissues last week. And lung is made of, again, the majority of the lung is made of a connective tissue, and it's covered in a thin layer of epithelial tissue with fluid in between the epithelial tissue and the rest of the connective tissue. And there's fluid in between that space, and what that allows for is it prevents friction. So instead of those two tissues rubbing up against each other, okay, there's a fluid in between, kind of like why we put oil in a car. Okay, so there's none of that friction, and what that prevents is damage to the connective tissue. Okay, so it makes it a lot easier. So when we inhale and exhale, you're not feeling stuff rub up against you, and it's not doing damage, and it's not uncomfortable in your chest cavity. Now we have two lungs in our chest cavity, so up at the top of your chest here, and it's protected in behind your rib cage, because this is actually a very delicate organ, so your ribs are there to protect them so that they don't get damaged. Okay, so when we breathe in air, we take a deep breath. Okay, where your air is going to go through, it's going to first go through your trachea. Okay, your trachea is sometimes also called your windpipe. If you've ever heard before, or you've ever said before, like you've taken a sip of water and you cough and you say, oh, it went down the wrong way. The wrong way is your trachea. Okay, you can actually feel your trachea if you put your neck back, okay, and you rub right around here. You'll be able to feel these little like bumps, okay, and those are actually rings of cartilage. Cartilage is the same stuff that makes up your ears and makes up your nose. It's not as strong as bone, but it helps things keep shape. Okay, but that's the main tube. When I take a big breath in, the first tube it's going to go down is my trachea, so to go down my throat. Okay, so the trachea is like the main highway. It goes down here. Your trachea is then going to split into two main pathways, one that's going to go into your right lung and one that's going to go into your left lung. And these two tubes are called your bronchus. Now, if you look at this structure over here, it kind of looks like an upside down tree. Okay, so if you're thinking of it that way, your bronchus is like the tree trunk. It's the major unit, or the major tube that breaks off from your trachea. Okay, your trachea will then branch off or break off into a number of smaller tubes, similar to how there's one tree trunk, but it'll then break off into a number of branches. Those are just smaller versions of that same tube. Those are called the bronchi. And at the very, very end, there's these little air bags. Okay, they're like little sacs that fill up with air, and those are called your alveoli. You can kind of think of them like the leaves on the tree. Okay, but they're little bags where the actual gas exchange can happen. So when I take a deep breath in, it's going to go through my trachea into one of my two bronchus, into my bronchi, which are a little bit smaller, and then finally end at these little alveoli. Okay, so that's the pathway of air. Now, the job of your respiratory system, your lungs being your major organ in your respiratory system, is inhalation and exhalation. So inhalation is the actual process of you taking in air from your surroundings. So when I take a big inhale, that's one of my jobs of my respiratory system. And exhalation, okay, getting those gases out of your body. So your respiratory system is involved in actually pulling in gases and expiring gases, or getting rid of gases. The other important job that they're involved in is gas exchange. So that's the actual exchange of gases between your lungs and your bloodstream. So when I take a big inhale in, and I'm taking in oxygen, it's going to go through my trachea, my bronchus, my bronchi, get to those little alveoli. And at the site of the alveoli, the oxygen that I've just breathed in is going to go from my lungs and actually into my bloodstream. Okay? Once it's in my bloodstream, it can go all throughout my body, and it can be used for whatever function it's needed for, or it can be used anywhere in my body where it's needed. It's also used for internal respiration, which means it's going to help the exchange of gases from your bloodstream back into those lung tissues. Okay? So once the carbon dioxide, so the bad stuff, comes from our body to our lungs, my lungs' job is also to get that carbon dioxide out of your body. Okay? Okay, so that's the main organ of our respiratory system and the main job of our respiratory system. Now, the next organ we're going to talk about is your heart. Now, your heart is actually a muscle. Okay, the majority of your heart is actually made of muscle tissue, and it's a really strong muscle actually, because if you think, unlike your legs or your arms, where you may go to the gym and work out for a bit and then go home and relax, your heart is never relaxed. Okay, it's always pumping. So Your heart is actually right in the center of your chest. There's a lot of misconceptions that it may be slightly to one side or other. It may be slightly, but for the most part, your heart is actually in the center of your chest, and it's right in between your two lungs. Okay. Again, because it's an organ, we know it's made of multiple tissues. So it's made of muscle, it's made of nervous tissue, and it's also made of connective tissue. And your heart has 4 major chambers, and we can see the pictures here. Okay. So it's got your left and right atria and your left and right ventricle. Now, if we look at this picture here, you may say, Miss, you have a typo on your picture. This is your right side, but it says left atrium, and this says is on the left side, and it says right atrium. Well, what you need to remember is these are labeled according to the person whose heart it is, not from the person who's perceiving it. So, for example, if you're looking at me right now, we're facing each other. This side right here, which is on your left, is my right. Okay. This side, which is on your right, is my left. Okay. So it's actually flipped. It's based on what it is for me as the person having the heart, not for you, the person looking at me, because we're in a mirror image when you're looking at me. Okay. So the things on the left side are actually called the right because the person who would be laying on, like, say, the operating bed, if you're doing a heart surgery, it would be their right side, and this is on our right, the person looking at it. But it would be, if I was doing surgery on the person, it would be on their left. Okay, so it's just flipped. Okay, the right things on the left side are labeled as right, things on the right side are labeled as left. It's also, there's 2 chambers up at the top called your atria. If it's singular, it's atrium. And the ones down at the bottom are called your ventricles. Okay, how I used to remember this when I was in school is if you draw a little diamond like that, or it's hard to draw it like this, you can make the top of a diamond an A. Sorry for my messy drawing. And you can make the bottom of the diamond a V, right? So this can remind you that the chambers at the top are called the atria, okay, and the chambers at the bottom are called the ventricles. Okay. The main job of your heart is to deliver blood to the rest of your body and to your lungs. Okay, so how blood actually pumps through your heart, okay? Let's say I've done a bunch of work, so I've been walking around, I know we're all social distancing, but I went for my walk today, so I've been using my arms and my legs, they've been using up energy. Part of the waste that my muscles are going to produce is carbon dioxide, and I need to get that carbon dioxide out of my body. Also, that blood is going to be lacking in oxygen. All that oxygen that I breathed in is going to get used up in the process of working my muscles. So the oxygen from your body is going to have very little the blood from your muscles is going to have very little oxygen in it, so we call it deoxygenated blood. Okay, just so you know, it's not actually blue. Okay, you don't have any blood in your body that's blue, but we usually label it as blue in diagrams like this, just so we can see the difference between the oxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood. Okay, so blood's going to come from your body. The first chamber it's going to enter is this one right here. Now remember, this looks like it's on the left side, so it's the right, and it's the chamber on top. So it starts with an A. The top of the diamond can make an A. So it's our right atria. Okay, it's going to enter our right atria, then go down into our right ventricle. And from our right ventricle, it's going to get pumped to our lungs. Okay, so it comes from your body to your right atria, to your right ventricle, and then it's going to go to your lungs. When it goes to your lungs, the blood's going to go to those little alveoli, those little air sacs at the end of your lungs. It's going to get filled up with oxygen there, and then it's going to come back to your heart. Okay, so now the blood is all full of oxygen because it's just been at the lungs. It's going to enter in here where we can see from lungs. It's going to enter this chamber right here. Now this chamber is on the left or the right side, so it's going to be a left, and because it's the chamber on top, it's going to be your left atria. Okay, it's going to go down then into this lower chamber here. Okay, it's on the right side, so it's the left, and it's on the bottom ventricle. So it's going to go from your lungs to your left atria, to your left ventricle, and then it's going to get pumped out to the rest of your body. After it leaves that left ventricle, it's going to go to everywhere in your body, to your brain, to your arms, to your legs, to your toes, and allow all of those muscles and all of those cells that need oxygen to get filled up with oxygen. And then we're going to start it all over again. It's going to be deoxygenated. It's going to go back into your right atria, your right ventricles, go to your lungs, get oxygenated, come back from their lungs, go to your left atria, your left ventricle, and back to your body. So it's kind of like this figure eight that's always going around as blood moves through your body. Now we have a few different blood vessels in our circulatory system. Okay, the vessels going away from the heart towards your body and your muscles they're called arteries. Now, arteries are a little bit different. They have a really thick layer of muscle to help squish that blood all throughout your body. Okay, but they're always going to be carrying oxygenated blood. Okay, for the most part. So these ones are going to have oxygenated blood in them, and they're going to be carrying blood away from your heart towards your muscles and your tissues, and they're going to have that thick layer of muscle that we can see right here to allow that movement. You also have veins. Veins are going to be the vessels that carry your deoxygenated blood away from your body back towards your heart. Now, a lot of times what you'll see, these have a much thinner layer of muscle, and they also have these little valves in them. And that's because a lot of times your veins, let's say if the muscle, the blood that was in my legs needs to go back up to my heart, it's got to go all the way up my body. So it's more difficult because we're going against gravity. So it's got these nice little valves in it. So it'll squish blood up here, and then that valve will shut to prevent the blood from falling back down. Okay, so all along the way it'll have these valves. So veins, for the most part, are going to be carrying deoxygenated blood. They're going to have a thinner layer of muscle, and they're going to have these nice little valves. Where the gas exchange actually happens are in tiny, 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 tiny little vessels called capillaries. Okay, and those are only usually about 1 blood cell thick. So that's going to be actually at the site where the gases are exchanged. Either oxygen's going into your muscles and your tissues, or carbon dioxide is coming out of your tissues back in. So essentially, when blood leaves your heart, it's going to go into some arteries. It's going to go to wherever it needs to go, which is going to get pushed into a capillary. And then after that gas exchange has happened, the capillaries are going to attach back up with a set of veins, and those veins are going to carry the blood back up towards your heart. Okay, so arteries are a thick layer of muscle, oxygenated blood. Veins have a thin layer of muscle. They have these nice valves, and they're going to be carrying deoxygenated blood. And capillaries are teeny, teeny, tiny. They're only about 1 blood vessel thick, and that's where the gas exchange is actually going to happen. Okay, so we can see we have arteries that branch off into these capillaries. The gas exchange happens, and then it'll collect back into veins and go back up towards your heart. So the job of the circulatory system is to carry oxygen-rich blood from your heart to your tissues. Makes sense, using your arteries. It's also got to carry the deoxygenated blood from your tissues back to your heart. We know that with our veins. It also helps us deliver through the blood oxygen, nutrients, hormones, everything that you need to get moved around your body. It's essentially a big transport system, is going to be done thanks to your circulatory system. And it also allows us to remove waste. So things like carbon dioxide, the blood will take it back to the heart. Heart will send that carbon dioxide in the blood to the lungs, and then we can expel it. Okay. So that's our circulatory system. You're going to be looking, because that one's a little more complicated with all the movement through your heart and all the different types of vessels, you're going to be reviewing it today with a gizmo at the end of the lesson. Okay, the next organ we're going to talk about is your brain. Your brain is made mostly of nervous tissue. So that's the tissue that's actually involved in sending communications throughout your body. We learned that last week. This is essentially your communication center, okay? It's where all our messages are received and processed and new messages are sent out. If you actually look at a brain, like a lot of times students will say, like, Miss, let's do a brain dissection. Brain dissections, I've done them before. They're actually not that interesting because you can't see a lot of the parts of your brain. It looks like it's just one continuous piece of tissue. It looks very similar if you cut them open. But just like if you looked at, say, North America from space, You wouldn't be able to see the borders of countries. Like you wouldn't be able to see where Canada starts and the US starts, because you wouldn't be able to see that line like we draw in arbitrarily in maps. Just like that, there's borders or parts of your brains that does different things, that performs different functions, but you can't actually see it through a dissection. Okay, so the different parts of the brain have very different jobs. And your brain's really important because it both receives information from your surroundings and also sends instructions to your body based on those stimuli. Okay. So your brain is the major organ in the nervous system. Now, what does your nervous system do? It perceives and responds to external sensations. So for example, your brain's partially responsible for if you touch something really hot and automatically your hand gets pulled away. Okay, your brain's part of sending those signals telling you what to do. Your brain integrates your memories, your emotions, your learning. Okay. It also is in control of your motor responses. So if I'm going to say I'm going to point this way, or I'm going to go walk to this side of the room, my brain is responsible for sending those signals. It also helps your body keep in a state of homeostasis. So that means, for example, if your body gets too hot, your brain is what perceives it getting too hot. It integrates those messages and it tells your body what to do in response. So when you start sweating, for example, your brain is responsible for coordinating all of that information. And it also sends signals all around your body. These may be electrical signals, like to tell your muscles what to do, can be hormonal signals. There's lots of different ways your brain sends messages all throughout your body. And that's why it's such an important organ. Now, the last organ we're going to be talking about today, a lot of times we don't think of it as an organ, but your skin is in fact an organ. Now, your skin is actually a lot more complicated than it looks. It's made of connective tissue, nervous tissue, muscle tissue, and epithelial tissue. So it's made of really all of the tissues we talked about last week. Your major job of your skin is to protect the inside of your body and your inner cells from damage from the outside, and it essentially acts like a defense, similar to like a brick wall around a castle that protects the castle. Your skin is what protects your internal environment from the external environment. Now, there's two main layers of your skin, both your epidermis and your dermis. Okay. So your epidermis is made mostly of epithelial tissue. That's the stuff you can actually see. Okay. So what you're seeing right now on my face and around my hands, that's my epidermis. Okay. It's the outermost protective layer, and it does things like it prevents bacteria and viruses from entering your body. Okay. So it's the outer protection that prevents, if I'm to touch something with bacteria on it, prevent it from going right into my blood. The other cool thing about your skin, and we should remember this because I know we're all social distancing, but if you get the opportunity to go sit in your backyard or sit near a window or sit outside or go for a walk, your skin, your epidermis actually makes vitamin D when it's exposed to UV radiation, so radiation from the sun. And vitamin D is really, really important in our absorption of calcium. Okay, so vitamin D is what helps us absorb calcium, and that therefore helps make our bones stronger. So if you were to look under a microscope, you can see your epidermis, it actually looks really flaky. There's all these skin cells that are consistently being regenerated and falling off, okay? And we can see some hairs coming out of here, but it's essentially just like a protective layer. Your dermis is just below your epidermis, okay? And it's the inner layer of your skin. Now, we have connective tissue here, nervous tissue, and muscle tissue. So connective tissue in your dermis helps provide structure and support. There's also blood that helps us regulate heat. So for example, when you get really warm and you look red, it's because your body's sending a lot of your blood to your dermis to cool off, because usually the external environment is cooler than your internal environment. You have nervous tissue in your dermis. That's how we can feel sensation, say with our fingers. The reason I can feel this pressure is because of the nervous tissue that's in my dermis, in my fingers. It also is going to detect heat and pain. And muscle tissue is around your hair follicles in your skin, and that's why we can make our hair stand up on end when we have things like goosebumps or goose pimples, depending on what you call them. So your skin is part of a system of your body called your integumentary system, this yellow line here. So your integumentary system's main job is just to protect you from the external environment. It also has jobs in absorption and excretion of materials. So for example, you can absorb some things through your skin, and you can excrete things through your skin, like through your pores or through sweat. Your integumentary system, like we said before, helps us regulate temperature and also helps us sense stimuli. So sense like pressure, pain, heat. Okay, so those are the main organs we were talking about today in the 4 main systems. What I'm going to have you do for the end of class today is work on your student exploration sheet for Gizmo. So what you're going to do, if you go to Explore Learning, move this out of the way so you can see, we've been using that quite a bit in class. Okay, you're going to log in. Again, remember your login is usually your GAPS password. So your GAPS email and your password should be the same as your password from school that you used to log on to the computers. Okay. So you're going to open your circulatory system Gizmo. Okay. And using the worksheet that's posted for you on Classroom, you're going to have 2 activities that you're going to do. So you launch your Gizmo. Can you also please remember to complete and submit after you've done your Gizmo down at the bottom here? Okay, you can see it says assessment questions. There's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 multiple choice questions. Can you complete those 5 multiple choice questions and make sure you check your answers to press submit, okay? So please make sure you remember to do those as well. Okay, so those are all there for you. So that's today's work. If you have any questions, check out my office hours. Send me an email at any time. Again, like you'll be able to get a hold of me a little bit quicker during my office hours. But other than that, post on Google Classroom or send me an email. I'm checking it regularly during normal school hours. Okay. So in the meantime, till our next lesson, hope you are staying safe, staying healthy, and staying inside. See you guys soon.